All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Sex Sales Podcast, the podcast where we talk about dating, culture, relationships, and society from a male and female perspective. And we are talking about a topic that I know all too well today, heightism. So, is there height inequality? Do short men have it worse than tall men? Well, they do, but to what degree do they have it worse than tall men? Do tall women have it worse than short or average-sized women? So we're going to get into that at the 3-minute mark. Before we do, we've got a couple of announcements. The first one is, as always, I'd like to shout out our sponsor, Crush Organics. They've been a sponsor on this podcast for a very long time, and I have been a consistent consumer of their CBD oil and CBD gummies, and man, they help with the sleep a lot. They help you relax. They alleviate many of those tense and anxious moments with a little gummy. So go get yourself some Crush Organics gummies, pain cream, CBD oil. Go to crushorganics.com. That's Crush with a K. Use the code NEEL, N-E-E-L, and you will get 40% off. If you want to see a comedy show, come to Comedy Untamed. This is a wonderful night of stand-up comedy, improv, crowd work. It's wild. It's fun. As the name suggests, it's untamed. We have regular shows in Sydney and Melbourne every single week. And during the Melbourne Comedy Festival, there's going to be some late night shows there happening on Friday and Saturday at 11 p.m. So, you know it's going to be very untamed on those nights. We also have regular shows in Newcastle, and Geelong is now finally officially on sale on March 25th. In fact, this podcast might actually be out by then, but regardless, there are going to be regular shows in Geelong. Aside from that, make sure you follow us on all the socials. Follow us on Instagram. We're putting a lot more highlights out there. Subscribe to the new YouTube channel, youtube.com/@SexSalesPodcast. I know a lot of you are already watching some of those full videos on there, and you're commenting, and the comment discussion is coming back, and it's really great to see. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow Eliza on Instagram, follow me on Instagram, check out all our socials. That is probably all the announcements at the top of the show. So we've gotten in nice and early before the 3-minute mark. Story of my life. Had to put a joke in there. This whole podcast is going to be a lot of height jokes because as a 5'7", as a proud 5'7" man, this is my area of expertise. So let's get into it. Heightism. Okay, so Eliza, this was actually your idea. You sent me an article talking about how short men may have it. Well, not just short men, but short people may have it worse in their professional lives. So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to actually talk about this.
I just find it really interesting, and I came across there's actually a subreddit, and it's called Short, and it's a lot of short people, usually men, talking about what goes on in their day-to-day life, and a lot of people say it's blatant discrimination, and some people want to make it a law, and about being, but then it gets into how do you prove it? Is it subconscious? Are people aware that they have subconscious bias? So it's an interesting topic, and I think that it's a blind spot to a lot of people that aren't short or really tall for women. I think people outside of that don't experience it, don't see it. So I guess you would know that more. You've talked about this a lot before. So what are your thoughts on it?
I was waiting for this podcast. Let's go. Let's get that manlet rage out there. Let's go. Okay. So I'm currently reading a book called The Psychology of Social Status. I actually had a whole chapter about how height and muscularity can affect one's perceived status. Now, they differentiate the status here between prestige and dominance. So prestige is sort of, let's just say that's the good sort of status. That's the status where you're considered to be competent, considered to be intelligent, considered to be good at your job, or whatever it is that is required of you in a given status hierarchy, whereas dominance is more about your ability to assert control and gain authority and power that way. So here's a little passage that I thought would be an interesting jumping off point for this podcast from that book. Much research has shown that height is positively correlated with actual social status. controlling for gender, as men are significantly taller than women across cultures. For instance, height is positively associated with income. For a meta-analysis and review, see Judge and Cable 2004. It is positively related to military rank and authority status in the workplace. Furthermore, individuals in managerial positions are on average taller than individuals in non-managerial positions. American science professors tend to be taller than the general public, and even the US presidential outcome is partially predicted by the height of the winning candidate. There is also evidence that being tall facilitates an individual's upward social mobility. There is also evidence that an individual's own power position affects their perceptions of height. Individuals who were made to feel more powerful overestimated their own height. Moreover, feeling more powerful leads to estimating other people as shorter than oneself, whereas feeling relatively powerless leads to estimating other people as taller than oneself. And it goes on to talk more about how height is correlated with financial status, with perceived competence, and then that can become a placebo effect where taller people, and as far as I'm aware, this predominantly relates to men, but I think taller women are also considered or perceived to be more competent, higher IQ, healthier, definitely with men, more attractive. There's a sort of wage gap where I read once where each inch of height that you gain as a man, your income goes up a certain amount on average.
$789 a year.
Yeah, wow. There you go. And then there's also you have a lower life expectancy, I read somewhere, or if you are shorter. So look, a lot of these markers of discrimination and inequity based on other sorts of groups are quite similar to these sorts of markers that predominantly short men, but also tall women. It's a bit different, but we'll get into that. These sorts of markers are experienced by people, and often when you try to articulate this, you're laughed at, or you're just told to get over it, or you're just told don't worry about it, or you have short man syndrome, and short man syndrome is somewhat of a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the concept of short man syndrome is that smaller men like to overcompensate for their lack of height by being needlessly aggressive and trying to obtain exorbitant amounts of material wealth and status to compensate for their lack of just physical superiority, if you want to put it that way. And the funny thing is, you're kind of trapped as a short guy, right? Because if someone says something about your height, and you know, banter's all well and good, but like, let's say someone, at least from your perception, goes a bit further and might be trying to insult you about your height. Either you have to cop it and just say, haha, yeah, that's funny, hilarious, or you try to call them out on it and immediately, look at him with his Napoleon complex, with his little short man syndrome. So you really are trapped in many ways. Yeah. And it's very interesting when I saw that article that you linked me, that people are now talking about this. I think I heard on Triple J of all places, they were talking about height when it comes to dating. They were talking about how there are, you know, just preferences that lead to a lot of inequality in the outcome of people on dating apps based on their height. Now, this also applies to tall women, particularly if we're talking, you know, above 5'10", and then especially above 6 foot. Their perceived attractiveness is lower. I mean, there's also, you know, they're more likely to be supermodels and things like that, so maybe other women perceive them as very attractive, but it does go both ways, because I think a lot of men could look at a 6'2" supermodel and think she's absolutely gorgeous, but then I would sort of think, okay, she probably wouldn't be that into me as a 5'7" kind of guy. So it goes both ways, and if people are like particularly insecure about their height, that can often manifest in unhealthy ways that then become a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy, like with what we've been talking about on many previous podcasts. Yeah, and then it can become a complex. And look, I hate to say it, but the whole short man complex thing doesn't fall out of the sky. I do unfortunately know a lot of guys that exhibit that sort of behavior, and they're quite short. They're like considerably shorter than me. So they'd be, 5'2", 3", 4", that kind of thing. So I suppose that's a little introduction to heightism. What do you think hearing things like that? But before we get into that, actually, let's just go with there's also, if you get to a point where you're excessively tall as a man, like maybe above 6'6", it does start to get to a point where people can see you as a freak, and they're just constantly asking you whether you play basketball, and a lot of clothes don't fit you, and things aren't that great for you either. And similarly, if you're very short as a woman, maybe below 5 foot, I'd imagine things aren't that good for you either. So basically, anyone who's like at any end of the spectrum here, you're gonna experience things differently, either from all the way up there or from all the way down there. But anyway, that's some broad thoughts to introduce the topic. What do you think hearing some of that?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, a really interesting thing I came across was obviously there is some subconscious judgment or discrimination that occurs from people when hiring or dating shorter people or short people. However, there is even more when it comes to the individual's personal perspective on themselves and how they rate their own height. So I came across some interesting kind of research about this, and one study said that women are mostly satisfied with a 21 centimeter difference between themselves and their partner. That's like the peak satisfaction. However, men at the same point also wanted women that are shorter than them. However, they were happy with 8 centimeters height difference, and that was perfect or ideal to them. But what was really important is that for women, their own height wasn't rated necessarily as a domineering factor on their own self-esteem. However, for men, it was extremely important how they judge and perceive their own height and the way they express satisfaction with their height. So they said that this study concluded that the satisfaction with one's own height is at least partly a consequence of the height preference of the opposite sex and satisfaction with one's partner's height. And that study showed that it wasn't current height that is the strongest factor, but height as a child. So it's almost something that stems from your childhood, which is really interesting as well, that it's kind of like a lifelong thing. And you know how we talked about before that that study that said for every inch you earn an additional $789 per year. There's been kind of caveats to that study saying that there is correlation, between cognitive ability and height. So basically, if you have cognitive disabilities, you're more likely to be short based on nutritional or other deficiencies in childhood. So that could be a reason as to why shorter people aren't getting paid as much. It may not necessarily be because of subconscious views about someone's height. It could just be because they're less likely to be intelligent. That doesn't mean short people aren't intelligent. It just means that unintelligent people are more likely to be short, if that makes sense. And the point that you made about women, I think, is a really important point. I came across an article today about a lawyer, and she was 4'11", and she said since working remote from home compared to in the office, she's getting like tenfold as much respect as she did when she was in person, especially going up against men. So that was really interesting. And my best friend, she's tall, she's 5'10", 5'11", and she was saying to me today, I asked her about it, and she was like, I have hated how tall I am my whole life. The only thing she ever got complimented on or commented on growing up was, oh, you'll be a model. There was nothing else. And she said that when it came to dating, especially particularly online dating, she would tell people her height, and shorter guys never wanted to date her, but they'd want to have sex, but they wouldn't want to be dating her. And combined with her height, she's also a very loud and outgoing, funny, vivacious personality. So she said, like, it's really hard walking into a room and being often the loudest and also the tallest female usually in the room, it can feel, and she gets anxiety about it. She gets social anxiety about it. So that's a little interesting thing. But I think as well as another little interesting kind of thing I came across and was thinking about and reflecting on is just like the language we use around height. And this kind of reflects our subconscious bias. Like when we say we look down upon someone or we look up to someone, or when we compliment a man, we might say, oh, he's so big and strong or big and mighty. Or when we're trying to insult someone, calling them small. And I was thinking about that girl on TikTok who, you know, admittedly I found funny in the past. Her name is Drew, I don't know, I can't remember her last name, Afuelo or something like that. And she goes against men that insult women. She stitches them on, which means she makes a response video on TikTok. She only chooses men that insult women that are usually sexist, misogynistic, blah, blah, blah. But her two biggest insults are you're short and you're bald. And even if they're not short or bald, she will say it. She would just, it's her response to anyone. And it's funny because there's this other kind of trend going around where girls will go onto TikTok live, so live videos of men, and just say, we love a short king, love heart. And it's so interesting to see how many men or how men respond to that, like desperately trying to prove, I'm not short, I'm this tall, this that tall, going and standing against a door frame, standing next to their fridge, getting like measurements out just to prove, like they're so threatened by the fact that someone said, and it wasn't even an insult, like you're short, they were literally saying, we love a short king. But they were so desperate to prove I'm not short. So I found that kind of interesting as well, like all the trends on social media about it. And obviously women's perspective on short men, which I think we should get into separately, and you can probably speak to that more as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of insecurity from the male perspective as well for a lot of short men. I know I definitely experienced a lot of that because I was always, there was one or two people that were shorter than me in high school, but I was definitely quite short. And, you know, you go to clubs and women are in heels and you just feel very unattractive having to be at their, below their eye level and things like that. And yeah, I definitely wore some of those boots with the heels in them. And, you know, when you tell people that, they say, oh, look at you with your little self-esteem issues, little man or whatever. And you think, well, come on, like, can't I do that? You know, it's almost like anything you do, even if you basically, like I said, you gotta just cop a bunch of jokes and that's fine. Like, I'm not against, if Drew wants to make fun of short men, if anyone wants to make fun of short men, go for it. I'm a comedian. Obviously, all jokes, go for it. But it's the hypocrisy. It's as soon as then, you know, a short person maybe makes fun of anyone else or does something that would be called assertive or dominant. If a tall man did it, he's insecure and he has small man syndrome. So that's another big one. Like if a taller man is really assertive, if he's loud and confident and comes across a certain way, his behavior is interpreted differently. He's assertive, he's dominant, he's confident. Whereas if a short man does that, he's overcompensating, or he's he's got something to prove. So yeah, I probably relate to that lawyer who's 4'11", and you know, there's a reason we do this. Nah, but it is good when this podcast is seated, let's say that. But there's a lot of people will meet me and say, well, wow, you're so much shorter in real life.
I can't believe people just say that.
Yeah, I know. It's
not
weird.
that it's like an insult, but like so irrelevant.
Exactly. It just seems kind of irrelevant. Like, you know, I would never say if I met, you know, a heavier singer in real life, I would never be like, well, you're so much fatter in real life. So it just is, it's hypocritical, particularly with some of that body positivity stuff. It makes it very hard for short men in particular, to empathize with some of women's body issues, because you think, well, look, I'm not in control of this height thing. And, you know, anytime you watch a dating show, what's the first thing a girl always says she wants? Tall, dark, handsome. And, you know, it's not saying it's on par with women's body issues or it's even equal to it, but it's just this sort of persistent reminder that you are never going to be as attractive as someone else based on these genetic factors that you can't control. Now, like we always talk about in this podcast, there are certain biological impulses we have that we can never fully rid ourselves of, that we can never, fully remove from our preferences. And I think a lot of people would say that's completely fair if women prefer taller men who are taller than them. But yeah, the hypocrisy is what gets to a lot of short people, I think. The fact that, I read somewhere, I don't know how accurate this is, but 90% of women on Bumble put their height requirement to 6 foot and above.
What?
And you think, again, I don't know how accurate that is, but I'm sure a lot to do. And yeah, it's just, it's not the end of the world. There's a lot of worse things that you could be dealing with. But yeah, it is very frustrating. And it's the sort of little moments of constant frustration throughout your life. And that's probably does manifest in a bit of small man syndrome. So, yeah, you're sort of trapped a little bit. And some of those statistics are, it's not nice to hear things like that. Like, you're perceived as less intelligent and even less healthy, and you're perceived as less prestigious as a leader if you're shorter, which is it's not nice. But it comes back to our tribal and animal days where the taller human being would have had stronger physical genetics that were more necessary in that tribal and forest-like environment. And also, someone who's tall, it's usually a sign of being well-nourished. And as a result, it becomes attractive because here is someone who signals they have resources. So, look, it all makes sense in the same way, men can't control what we're attracted to. And I'm sure a lot of women who might not have those assets find that really hurtful and frustrating. But it's good. Look, I don't think most short men want, when it comes to dating, I don't think short men would expect women to just pity date them or completely, go against what their preferences are. But it's just nice when people are aware of it and just sort of say, that's it's a valid frustration, particularly when we're in this world where we're talking a lot about people's, seemingly minimal but significant frustrations that can be felt. And I think it's nice that I'm seeing some of these articles now, and I haven't seen this Reddit thread, but probably that would be good. I think the fact that people are talking about it is nice. So that's a good start.
Yeah, for sure. I think first of all, when it comes to dating and the perspective of women on height, I completely acknowledge and validate as well that there is so much judgment. I've seen a lot of women post those things on their dating bios saying must be above 6 foot, or even if they don't post that, just immediately asking, hey, what's your height? Out of curiosity or whatever. No judgment, just wondering, like, why are you just wondering? And I have seen a lot of judgment and dismissal to shorter men, especially on, say, if viral videos of someone saying, oh, this guy cheated on me, and they're like, oh, the audacity of a short man to cheat. I see that kind of language coming up a lot, especially on TikTok. There was, that was a while back, which interestingly, I feel like that kind of swung the other way in the end, where it became kind of like a thing to say we love short kings.
Can I quickly jump in there? Some of that, I really, it's nice, but I think a lot of short men hear something like that and think, oh, you're just kind of saying that. And
it's condescending.
Yeah, it's a little bit condescending.
Yeah, no, I can see that as well, for sure. So I do think that there is a lot of, I can understand when people get upset and almost bitter based on women's judgments or heterosexual women's judgment on men's height. However, there's also an equal contribution, I think, just from the patriarchal society on the importance of height for men, particularly that, is it necessarily that women want taller men because they're more likely to be strong and dominant, blah, blah, blah? Or is it because men want women that are smaller and more petite? So I do feel like it goes both ways in that sense. I know that women, just anecdotally, I know a lot of women saying that they are happy to date shorter guys or short guys, but they don't want to feel like they're almost like embarrassed about being bigger or as big as or more carrying more weight. So it kind of, I do think in some ways it definitely goes both ways. And also I've seen a lot of men, and I saw this on Reddit as well, on that subreddit, where when women date shorter men, especially on TikTok, there's a lot of women commenting positive things, saying you guys are so cute, and so many other men saying you could do better. Why are you dating him? He's short. Like, men were the ones pointing it out. So there was a study I came across where they had, it was in the US, but researchers interviewed, it was a small sample size, it was like 470 people in university, asking them what makes a good leader. And I think it was 64% of them made the leader tall. And then when they asked what they would perceive themselves as, if they would perceive themselves as good leaders, the tall people are the ones that said, yes, I would be a good leader. So they're much more likely to promote themselves as a leader if they're tall. So I do think a lot of personal bias about height does come from men equally as it comes from women. It's a societal issue at a whole. And the issue then is like, and I saw this, people commenting about this on Reddit, being like, and like you said, it's kind of a catch-22. You win, you lose either way, because if you go on about it being a societal issue and how shorter people are disadvantaged and judged more, then you get judged more for ranting about you being a short man or a short woman or whatever. And then you're kind of further perpetuating the idea that shorter people are more ABC. There was a positive study I did read about shorter men in particular, though. It was that they're more likely to be perceived as trustworthy and loyal. So there's that.
Well, I feel like that's something that's nice, but it would be maybe similar to how someone with a dad bod is perceived as trustworthy and loyal.
Yeah.
Maybe because it
true.
might be because they're just perceived
Not
to have
threatening.
less options. Yeah, you made a good point there where, you know, as long as people like you, no one will say anything about your height or just any sort of physical appearance, that the factor that you may have. But as soon as someone doesn't like you, or as soon as you become not necessarily an enemy, but antagonistic in any sort of way, oh, that little guy.
Yeah.
Oh, there's just the little small guy or whatever. And again, like, I'm the first person to make jokes about my height, and I think it's, if it's done well, it's pretty funny if people can make fun of their height or other people's height. But there does seem to be a point at which the banter can get a bit excessive, particularly if it's guys that I'm not close with, and I get the feeling they're just trying to almost assert social dominance in a way. Like, in fact, this book I was reading was talking about how men with high testosterone that feel insecure in their position in a given social hierarchy will try to assert, they'll use aggression and dominance tactics to try and move up a social hierarchy, and it definitely can come across that way, and it certainly feels that way sometimes. And I suppose, again, a lot of this is natural. I don't know. I think some of it, like with everything, it's some of it is societal and some of it is just our natural impulses. So the question does become, okay, how much can you fully do about it? But like what I always say on this issue, it's more the hypocrisy, and people just talk about it. That's nice, I think, and talk about it in this sort of way. Like, it's just, okay, it's something to be aware of.
Yeah.
Without it, I haven't read these Reddit threads, but I don't think like they need to do quotas or any, I don't know what he was suggesting, but that might be a bit ridiculous. Let's talk about tall women a bit more. That friend that you talked about, that was interesting because she's just 5'10", 11. That's not that tall as a woman. It's pretty normal in Australia, actually. So, the fact that she's very insecure, being what is essentially like maybe just a bit above average height, that's not nice. That's not particularly good.
When we go out, so many people comment on her being tall. And she says the same thing. She's like,
Isn't that
I'm
tall?
not
Like,
that
yeah.
tall. She's like 173 centimeters, I think. She's like, I'm not wildly tall.
That's like normal for a.
But
Is she
so
white?
many people comment. Is she what?
What's
White?
her? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
pretty
she's
normal
white,
for a
yeah.
white woman, right? 173.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. So it's something that she's self-conscious of. There's definitely been advantages, of course, times where she's loved it, but then it's also come to the time when those times that were advantageous was when she was really, really slim and really tall. And then it was like, you're a beauty. And she still is like a slim woman. She's just growing. You know, she's no longer 18. She's just a normal-bodied woman. And it's funny how that kind of changes where everyone goes, oh, you're so tall, you could be a model. And now it's, you're so tall. That's just the comment all the time. You're so tall. You're so tall. Every time we go out, people comment on it. So, yeah, and I definitely have seen as well men be somewhat more intimidated, I think, or maybe even just not attracted to the fact that she's tall, or otherwise it's like fetishized. So there were times in my Tinder dating times where she would be in some of my photos and people would be like, I like that tall chick. I was like, okay, thanks. But yeah, so it is interesting, but yeah, it's interesting though, she also always ends up in managerial roles. So she always like climbs the corporate ladder so fast. She has switched from so many different realms, working in disability, then going into events, doing all these different types of things, and she always climbs the ladder so fast compared to normal peers or other people her age. So I do think that could be coming into play as well, that and the fact that she's very confident, very outgoing, very well spoken, and super funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the other friend I had in high school, she's 4'11" or maybe just on 5 foot, and it was the same thing in that everyone always commented on her being really short, but she had these humongous, well, she still does, huge tits, basically. So she's this tiny, tiny, petite girl with giant boobs, and God, I just feel for her so much how many people comment on her body constantly, and the battle she has to do to get taken seriously in corporate world as well, where she looks like an walking anime basically, and it's just, yeah, I don't know if I do think that there was a point of self-consciousness for her, but I don't think it actually impacted her in the way that it impacted my tall friend, because my very short friend was fetishized so much. It was like she was so sexually objectified and still is. So in some ways that was more, you know, she would get more, I don't want to say it was more advantageous because it was something that is a really terrible thing that was goes on for her. But she was almost getting more respect for men because she was so petite, and she couldn't help the fact that her body looked very, you know, that in that way. So it is interesting how sexual preference comes so much into it, as well as men's own personal perception on what is masculine, as well as women's perspective on what is masculine as well. So yeah, it's a bit of both.
Yeah, there's ways to, if you sort of internally feel small and you don't, and you think that your height is the contributing factor to the way people perceive you, that is going to manifest in you coming across in a very small way. I mean, there's plenty of smaller statured men who still exude confidence and status and are very attractive. I mean, look, obviously not a very ethical man, but someone like Vladimir Putin, I always look at him and like, man, he's like 5'6", I think. And he definitely exudes status, power, and confidence. We'll say that much.
Yeah.
And he's bold. So, look, not someone to aim to be exactly like, but that factor of his personality, you know, clearly he's a very, he's not necessarily ethical. He's very competent. He climbed the ranks in the KGB pretty well, from what I heard. So, that's an example of a short kid. Well, he's a short dictator, isn't he? Short tyrant. So maybe it's his,
So
maybe
true.
it's his small man. Maybe he wouldn't have invaded
And maybe
Ukraine.
it was a motivating factor as well. Like,
Oh, it
you
often
know,
is, yeah.
yeah. My brother, he's not like super short. I think he's 5'9", but he's considered himself short, as do a lot of people. And he, as a kid, even as a teenager in particular, was really short. And he got bullied for it a little bit, or probably a lot. And as soon as he became an adult, he went kind of similar to you, actually. He's quite similar to you in personality. He's very, very intelligent, very well spoken, and then went straight into doing all this martial arts, and he's a black belt in BJJ. So it's kind of like he...
Yeah. Is he a black belt? Wow.
Yeah. He went around traveling, teaching it and things like that. So he's
Wow.
really into that. And when it wasn't that, before that, he was like a semi-pro surfer. And now that he's moved on from BJJ, he's into like crazy like ultra marathon running. So it's
How
funny
old is
to
he?
me. He's 30. He's 30. Yeah. Goes to the
Wow.
extreme. But he always like references a story where and I've mentioned it on this podcast before, but he got in like some road rage with some big guy in a truck, and the guy was looking at him in the window saying, "Get the fuck out of your car, get out." And Ollie gets up out in his gi, like the jiu-jitsu wear, and then immediately the man was like, "It's all good." Like all good. And that, I feel like that was such like an empowering moment for him. And then I also feel like it kind of came a little bit too into the sense that I think that it flipped for him so much where he was finally feeling so much more like masculine for the first time, and then he got really fit and muscular, whereas previously as a child he wasn't any of those things. So he came into his masculinity by sheer like determination and motivation from being belittled or bullied as a kid, which is, you know, backed by that research I was talking about before. But it's interesting because, not that I'm saying that's what motivated you, but you're quite similar in that sense. And you're in what are you in, karate? Is it
Taekwondo? Yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, very relatable there.
Yeah.
I not only was I short, I'm also very skinny. So I'm very much an ectomorph. I think that's the term where.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're just sort of small boned and not everything small, but the skeletal structure is, and so I was short and also very slim, and then wasn't super confident. But in fact, it was acting that I felt like I could come out of my shell and be really confident, but it was almost a form of like avoidance in a way where I was really good at just the best I was at acting was when I was completely consumed in a completely different character, right? And so I felt most confident when I wasn't myself. Not to make this too much like a therapy session or anything, but I think a lot of actors have a similar sort of situation, and gradually, I suppose, because I got famous really early on, I suddenly had all this status, but I'd still internalized how I felt from when I was a child and an adolescent, which was, I wasn't sort of right at the bottom of the male pecking order per se, but I was definitely, I was the jokester, I was the funny guy, and I definitely wasn't sort of the top of that hierarchy either. But then suddenly I'm all these people know me and I've got all this kind of status in a way, but my mentality was incongruent with the actual status position I'd now had, and that in many ways can be actually more off-putting for people because I was still deeply insecure about my my height and how I came across to other men and to other people. And I remember some of my early girlfriends actually being a bit shocked and confused because they're here kind of dating this pseudo celebrity, and then meanwhile I'm sitting there thinking that I'm not a complete loser or anything, but that guy was so tall, man, but I'm so much shorter, just basic little sort of instances where those insecurities would come out. And then it was a very long and gradual process, but I definitely put on quite a lot of muscle, and I think growing the beard definitely helped. And now people even I think I've done pretty well relative to my height. Like now people are always quite shocked when I tell them my height, and they'll always say things, "Oh, you don't seem like a short person," which is a weird way of sort of saying you're
what
confident.
A backhanded,
Yeah. And then even this guy at the gym once was like, he's a scary looking guy and really good boxer. He was like, "Man, bro, you've got this look about you where I wouldn't want to mess with you." And I'm like, man, if a ethnic guy from Western Sydney saying that, yeah, that's
that
good to know.
must have been so healing to your inner child.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I was like, thanks, bro.
Wow.
But deep down, I'm like, oh my God.
Fangirl. Do you find that it's something that you still are conscious of, like today?
A lot less, but you never really are not conscious of that. It's like with, say, the when people talk about race, the observation they get correct, I suppose the progressive side of politics and culture is that when you're not the norm or when you're a minority race, you just have to think about race a lot more. Now, some of the solutions they have for that are the things that I quite fervently disagree with, but I would say it's the same with height. You know, you just have to think about it a lot more. You perceive it a lot more than other people do, and sometimes that's you with an unhealthy narrative you have about yourself and the world and how the world sees you and your stature. But you're just thinking about it constantly. You're wondering, you know, the people I might be doing a sketch with, like, am I going to come across as, because you know, all the people I collab with happen to be very tall. You know, Daniel's about 6'5", Frenchie's like 6'5", 6'6". Isaac Butterfield's like 6'8" and like 120 kilos.
Wow.
I mean, Lewis Spears is 6'10" or something. And again, that's like the other side of the heightism thing.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think, you know, it's particularly good being that tall either. So yeah, just on video, it makes me look even shorter than I am. But look, you generally, if you learn to deal with it, learn to sort of reframe that narrative, and you know, have the self-awareness to understand when you might be overcompensating, and ensure that you don't adopt too unhealthy a narrative about it while still being a realist. I'd say that's the way to go. You know, there are clothes you can wear as a man that are, I suppose, more slimming, but don't make you look like a child either. You want to be, you know, fit and athletic, but if you get too buff as a short guy as well, you can look. And that's not to, you know, judge anyone who's a powerlifter or a bodybuilder or anything like that. It's very commendable. But if you're just looking to sort of maximize how tall you might be perceived by others, you can't get too buff as a short guy. So there's just these little things, really. None of them are, I'd say, entirely drastic or oppressive, but just a lot of little moments of frustration and insecurity that can kind of accumulate to develop a relatively unhealthy self-image. I'd say that is a common thing among smaller men, and I'd assume it's similar for very tall women as well. Not identical, but similar.
Yeah. Do you know what's interesting when you're talking about, you know, dressing? I remember watching the most recent season of Beauty and the Geek Australia, and most of the geeks were short men, and when they had their makeovers, the guy that came in to style them was all about how, you know, don't wear these shirts that go halfway down your thigh, don't wear pants like that, wear pants like this, all about the straight leg, not the skinny jean, all this stuff. There was so much to it, and I felt so conflicted watching it because the makeovers were amazing and fashion was a huge part of it. And I have to admit, I was like, wow, how much better do they look? But at the same point, I was so saddened and also like felt conflicted about like how much science had to go into how to dress to not appear short. Even though it wasn't changing or manipulating height, it was all about like the visual and the proportions. But God, there was so much, and the same way that women get that in terms of not in so much in height, but in weight, so like how to dress if you're a bigger woman, or plus size. So yeah, it was just like, I was like, I don't know if I should be celebrating this or feeling like, oh, how do these men feel? Do they like, wow, I feel great, look at my makeover? Or do they feel like I've just been told basically, oh, you've been so unsuccessful because of the way you dress, because it emphasizes your shortness. So that was kind of a weird, point to observe and watch, and then seeing as well the beauties afterwards celebrate the makeovers. Like, you want to celebrate, obviously, and it's not like they made them taller, but yeah, I just felt weird. And then at the same point, when you were talking about kind of like your own self-perception and your self-esteem and the confidence around that, I remember seeing this post on the Tinder subreddit, and it was this guy, and he was 5'3" or 5'4", so quite short, and I don't know how accurate this was, he could be lying, but apparently you can do like these Tinder trees. Basically, it says how many matches you got, how many dates you went on, how many people you slept with, how many people ghosted you. It shows like all the stats, and then if you got married.
And that's on the app. How many people you slept with?
Apparently.
Do you have to? Ooh.
I don't know how it works. But I've seen heaps of people posting them. Like, a lot of guys post them, not this isn't related to short, but a lot of guys post it being like, how have I had 2,300 matches in this year? And then it goes down like conversation started, blah, 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 and then ended up only going on one date out of 2,000 matches, and then only 200 conversations occurred, and then they even have like plans to meet, and then dates that actually occurred. So I don't know how they collate the data. I have to figure that out. But anyway, there was one guy that posted, and he was 5'3" or 5'4", I can't remember, but he was saying like, I've literally never given a fuck about my height. It's never been like an issue for me. I don't, like, I'm sure, so what? And it showed that he'd slept with heaps of women and matched with heaps of women, and there's so many men were commenting, and to be fair, it's a much more like male dominated like subreddit, but they were going like, how did you do that? Oh my god, like thinking it's like he's done the impossible, like he's pulled a miracle, and being like, I need to see photos of your face, I need to see what you look like, just being purely shocked. But I did find it interesting that he was like, yeah, I don't care, like it's never been a hindrance for me.
And that's the attitude you can fake that to a certain degree, but that comes from, it's an internal narrative that you tell yourself, and it takes quite a while, particularly if you've been socialized in a way where you've been made to feel inferior because of your height. But that is the exact sort of strategy you need to employ. And there are instances where there are, shorter, smaller guys who do really well because they just exude confidence, they exude charisma and sex appeal. Someone like, say, Prince, he was 5'1" or something, but you know, every woman in the 80s wanted to sleep with him.
That's a great reference point.
Someone like a Justin Bieber, he's a pretty short guy from what I hear. He might even be, there's rumors about him being like 5'5" and 5'6", and you know, with celebrity heights, they always manipulate that online. Someone like Zac Efron, is a very short kind of guy, but I'm sure a lot of women who are 5'10" would be happy to date Zac Efron. Now, I'm sure people are also listening, thinking, well, because they're you literally have to be a celebrity to do that. Which, look, there's a certain truth to that, but at the same time, there are some, I know some guys who are quite short and do very well just because they have this kind of aura of being calm, being comfortable, being fun. And at the end of the day, that's the most effective strategy with any kind of dating. If you go.
You
go on.
I was going to say, any man that is comfortable within themselves is sexy. I think, like, no matter what they look like, if they're comfortable with themselves, there's sex appeal there, I think. Just, that's my hot take.
Yeah, and that's not something that people are just telling you to make you feel good. That
Yeah.
is verifiably true, and
Yeah.
it just can take a lot of time and work and sort of inner psychological training to get to a point where you're properly and truly just comfortable with yourself. And look, there's always going to be things you're still insecure about, and you're never going to be completely at ease with everything. But you can definitely improve upon how you see yourself and how you your perception of your position in a given hierarchy of attractiveness. I wanted to come back to something you talked about earlier, where shorter men didn't necessarily have a preference to date taller women, and look, I'm in two minds about that. I have dated girls that are sort of slightly taller than me, 1 or 2 centimeters kind of thing. But I don't think I haven't had a long, proper relationship with anyone who's considerably taller than me. I've gone on dates with some girls who are quite tall. I've had one-night stands. And look, there is this kind of physical... It could be my narrative, but, there's something very primal that does come out, particularly if you're being intimate with someone. And if you have that kind of more physically dominant presence, it makes you feel good as the man.
Yeah.
And from what I've heard, a lot of women enjoy that as well. Now, that's not to say you can't have a fulfilling sex life if you've got a male partner who's shorter than you or a female partner who's taller than you. But look, I'm guilty of that. I do prefer women maybe, my height or a bit shorter, or like slightly taller. But when you start getting into 5, 10, 11, 6 foot territory, it's it can get a bit awkward. And again, that could be my narrative. But that's what I found. And at the same time, I've always perceived them to be less interested and attracted towards me.
Yeah, there's all that cognitive bias as well. Like assuming someone is not going to be, which is probably likely. Like women that are tall will probably feel the same. A short man won't want me, or vice versa. I don't want a shorter guy because it's going to feel weird for both of us. And I think that's like an interesting point, though. Like how much that sexual preference does come into this, because, and even in like say gay couples as well, where if you date someone really small, short, or petite, there's whether it be woman or man, there is like a sexual component to that is what is attractive. Like you might want to be domineering to them, or perhaps if you want a taller woman, like my friend who when guys approach her that are shorter than her, they're always approaching her on a sexual level rather than a romantic sense. Like that would never happen. Well, I wouldn't say that would never happen. That has never happened, where they would be open to dating when she's significantly taller, but they're very open to having sex. And I think it's, that kind of her being tall paired with the fact that she's a dominant personality. It's a sexual thing as well. Like this is something that I'm into, being dominated by a woman perhaps. Like the associations that we make with height and sexual preference or what will happen sexually, I think is really interesting. And I know one of my friends who dates a guy and he's 6'5", and she was really off-put. I don't know, or maybe she wasn't off-put, but she was shocked that he was really submissive sexually. And there was such like a contrast for her that it couldn't commute to her. And I was like, babe, really tall people can have preferences and don't have to be like dominating, and maybe he wants to be dominated, or maybe he wants to be submissive. Like that's not a shocking thing. Any normal, if you're like an average, if say for example my height, I'm 166 centimeters, just smack bang average for a woman, no one would be shocked if I say I like to dominate or if I like to be dominated. It's just whatever. I could say whichever and no one would be shocked. But it's so interesting when that script is given to someone that's very short or very tall. And these are the things I think a big takeaway for everyone is to just be like aware of our own cognitive bias or subconscious judgment. And I was reflecting on this before, that I have definitely had in the hiring process, I could think of one reference where I did have, made assumptions when we wanted to specifically hire a man, because we're working in Western Sydney. There was a lot of cultural issues there. There was, sometimes men didn't respect women coming into the home. We couldn't get through. So we kind of wanted a man that was intimidating. And I interviewed a guy, and he was 5 foot, 50 kilos, and very shy and meek. And I went away and I was like, this guy is so smart. He's so intelligent. He knows everything, but he's not going to fulfill the purpose in which we wanted to hire him for. And I was really like conflicted. And then I was like, am I really considering not hiring someone because he wasn't going to be as domineering as I thought? And I did hire him. And he was fantastic. He's been, he was amazing. But yeah, it was kind of like a moment where I had to check myself. I would never think that I would be judgmental towards someone's height. But even I had a subconscious bias being like, oh, he's not going to be able to put men in check. And that's what we need this person for. And my God, he did. So
there you go.
There you go.
That's really interesting, actually. Yeah. 'Cause the professional and employment component of this is something maybe we can end this podcast on, because we've touched on it, but it's not particularly nice hearing that you're perceived as less intelligent and less competent simply because of your height. And it would be the same with anything, your gender or your race or anything like that. And especially if you actually are competent and are intelligent and you just have to deal with this because that's the stereotype. And as a result, you might have to go that extra mile just to sort of prove your credentials. And it's not nice hearing some of those statistics and knowing that I think with US presidents, it's something like only one was under 5'9" or something ever. It was it's some ridiculous statistic that's.
I've got one. It said when it comes to US presidential elections since 1990, majority or 21 of the past 30 election winners were taller or at least as tall as their opponent. And also there was another stat, I didn't write it down, but it basically was that there's a much more preferential vote towards people that were taller. At least initially. So it's hectic. And CEOs, like you said, I think it's something crazy, 90% of CEOs that are men are above 6 foot.
Yeah, wow.
It's mind-blowing.
I mean, because you get so many, you're probably very confident in your looks and how you feel because you get that sort of positive feedback loop. Let's say you're above average height through high school, and then you're also decently good looking. You get a lot of interest from girls, so you feel very confident about yourself. And as a result, you're more likely to partake in positive behaviors that actually, contribute to your competency. And we move into the workforce, and people already perceive you to be more competent. And you're because of that, you're thrust into positions of power and responsibility, and that further increases your competency and your experience, and it goes all the way to the top.
Confidence,
and look, I don't really know because I'm not a fan of quotas, and sometimes being hyper aware of these things can create a sort of insufferable mindset where people then can become a victim and, just make excuses for their lack of work ethic or their inability to do what is necessary to get to a certain position. But if people are sort of reasonably aware of these sorts of things, I think that's at least the first step. And it's not to, it's not to say, oh, okay, you're the short guy is always going to be more competent than the person you think than the tall guy because you then have to overthink the subconscious or anything like that. But yeah, I think if people are just sort of aware of this within reason, I think most short guys would be happy with that. And I think if if maybe not if 90% of women put their Tinder or whatever their height requirement is to 6 foot and above, I'm sure. Look, being tall is always going to be an advantage, as with being rich, as with having a good jawline and being well endowed, and all these things we might not necessarily be in control of. So, look, there's never going to be this perfectly equal dating society where everyone is equally as attractive as everyone else. Unfortunately, that is the human condition and human nature. But look, if you're a girl out there that might be a bit taller, or maybe hasn't gone on many dates with short guys, hey, give it a go. Don't pity date people. I think that's pretty bad. But just branch out. Maybe see what it's like, and who knows, you could meet someone very special. And similarly, if a tall girl is interested in you, don't have to necessarily discount her just because she's tall. I'm not going to ever force people to go against what their natural proclivities may be, but always give people a chance and just, I think, look, whatever you wouldn't say to a fat person, use that same rule with a short person. True. So if you wouldn't say to a fat person, oh, you look a lot fatter than I thought you were, well, then don't say to a short person, oh, you look a lot shorter than I thought you were. So I would just generally use that. I mean, I know when people are describing me, they're going to say, yeah, he's short and he's a lot shorter than I thought he would be. And that's fine. But in the same way, look, if I might be describing someone who is heavier, I would say things like that. But then when you're talking to them face to face, just acknowledge that there might be a sort of basic level of decorum and politeness that you should employ when talking about these, physical attributes, as you would with someone who's on the heavier side.
Yeah, I agree. And also, when you're talking about just being aware, I saw someone write this perfectly, and I'm going to reference Reddit again, but I saw someone wrote this, and he said, we as a society simply don't have the time and energy to spend creating advocacy and awareness for every conceivable form of discrimination. It's more important to simply remind people that they may unconsciously hold any number of prejudice when making a decision, for example, to hire someone, and that they ought to try their best to judge according to objective criteria. So I thought that kind of put it perfectly. Yeah.
Well said. Perfect note to end this one on. Unless do you have any final thoughts on this topic? I think I've adequately expressed my experience, but also some of the statistics that I've been recently reading, and I would love to hear what people have to say in the comments. So if you haven't subscribed already, youtube.com/@SexSalesPodcast, and chuck us a follow on Instagram, on TikTok, and thanks for listening and or watching. See you next time.
See you next week.